Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you are in the UK or Ireland or anywhere else that isn't morning time. Rob, thank you for joining us again. So look, we got to about slide number 9 last week, or the week before.
Technically both last month and last week.
Okay, last month and last week. So, and the idea of this webinar is to walk through compliance from an IT professional's viewpoint, because the problem is with compliance, it's written by lawyers and not by IT people. And quite often it's like, well, what am I supposed to do to be compliant? Now, not everything in these standards is an IT function. Much of it is a developer function, and we'll touch on some of that today. Much of it is a business function. But the IT function stuff, you need to know what it is. You need to understand what you should be doing. And frankly, most of the things that you're required to do are actually going to save your ass one day anyway. So I'm going to share my screen to the next group. We're going to move a little bit faster this week because we didn't get through enough slides last week. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to share the screen. We're going to keep going through these slides. And again, if you have questions, please ask. Let me share my screen. Last week, we finished on application control. So those who don't remember, application control is a way to only allow software you need in your environment. So stop games, stop IP scanners, stop untrusted software, and to block everything else, including malware. We did map them to various different cybersecurity frameworks. There was a change to the NIST 800-171 framework, which hasn't been updated in this document. Revision 3, which is currently in draft and will be released this year, now actually has a direct mapping to application allow listing. So it's not on here. It will be updated in the handbook, but it's worth noting. Now, or maybe it is on here. I'm actually looking at this slide before. Let me just double check. No, disable. Oh, it isn't here. I think it's not updated to allow listing in there. So the final thing we didn't talk about is the great thing about application control is it stops anything from running. But what happens when a user wants new software? How do you test that environment and ensure that it's working? So one of the controls, it's actually more in the HIPAA rule, is the only direct mapping, requires you that you test all software in some kind of sandbox or environment before putting it live, a separate environment from your real environment. So if you are using application control, though, it's a good idea to not just approve things that users request, because I had an email from a partner, I think probably 2-3 years ago, and it was a forwarded email from a client that was really, really mad that the MSP had blocked them from running software on their machine. Now, what happened is the user had got a Word document. It was a doc file, not a doc file. And when they opened the doc file, it asked them to enable macros. And when they clicked enable macros, it asked them to enable content or enable editing, then enable macros. And then when they did enable macros, ThreatLocker popped up in the bottom corner of the screen saying, we have stopped this batch file from running. So the customer, instead of saying, wait there, maybe the fact I put a password in this document, it came from an unknown source, it enabled me to enable and asked me to enable security content. And now that my endpoint protection is telling me this is bad and you need to request it from your IT department, maybe that's a sign something bad is happening. But no, they didn't think that. They sent a message to the MSP saying that they had no right to control what they did on their computer.
Why wouldn't you enable macros and enable editing and random documents, Danny?
Why not? I mean, it seems like a good idea.
That could happen.
Apparently ransomware, because we ran the exact same file in our sandbox, because we like to do things like that. And it encrypted all of our files. And so users don't necessarily know what they're asking for. So what ThreatLocker allows you to do when you approve new software, if you are a partner and you haven't used this, please test it out, is you can run it in ThreatLocker's testing environment before you actually allow it. Now, the first thing it allows you to do is actually see what the software does, because just because it's called payroll.exe, it might actually be a game or somebody renaming a file. So you get to see what it does, what it looks like. Is it actually performing a business function? But the other thing is it will check every file against VirusTotal or known malware. It will tell you what it's going to do on the internet. It will show you, is it creating startup files? It will show you system changes. And it will show, we even have canaries on there, so it will show you if it's messing with your data. So generally speaking, when you allow new software, you should see what it does in your environment. And ThreatLocker's testing environment, really easy to do that really quick.
It's one of the most common questions I was always asked when I told people they could download a copy of the file the user tried to run. First question was always, well, what sandbox do you recommend? And the answer previously was, I don't know, whichever sandbox you use, but testing environment is awesome. It's one provided for you.
And it takes about 30 seconds to spin up a test, if that. And it's really cool. So if you haven't used it, test it out. If you aren't a partner, just ask for a free trial and we'll show you how easy it is to work. Backup and disaster recovery. Here's a little secret. When you're recovering from a backup because of a cyber breach, you failed. So this is recovering from a cyber breach. So it isn't a cybersecurity strategy, it's a business continuity strategy. And yes, you should have really good backups. ThreatLocker can help you protect your backups with our storage control by limiting which programs can access it. But make sure, here's the most important things, make sure you have regular backups, whether it's for cyber strategy or whether it's just common sense. Make sure you have backups on-site and off-site. And when we say off-site, we mean physically and logically disconnected from your network, because having it, the old days of backing up to another site physically that's connected to the same domain and same network is really not very smart. One of the things to watch out for here is attackers will actually, when they get into your system, they will they'll look at your retention policies and they'll change your backups to just back up fake data. So you keep getting your green report every day and they'll wait until your retention policy passes before actually launching an attack. So be really, really vigilant of that. Of course, don't let them on.
The other point about backups and disaster recovery. So backup software is one of the easiest and most efficient ways to exfiltrate enormous amounts of data from organizations without anyone noticing. So all I have to do is get into your Veeam server, and instead of backing up to threatlocker.veeam.com, I'll just back up to badguy.veeam.com. I mean, is anybody going to notice it? So yeah, another reason that ring fencing is so important. So controlling where things like backup software can connect to is critical.
Where it's connected to, but also what backup software you can run, really, really important as well. Backup integrity, verifications, and backup tested. We do this nearly every week in ThreatLocker. We do restores of partial single instances, partial restores, full restores, restores to second data centers. We want to make sure that everything is fully tested and you can execute in a disaster. And now bear in mind, when there's a disaster, there's more things going on than your backup. So you have to assume whatever you can do in a tested lab environment, it's going to be harder in a disaster because you might not have any power.
It's like when an actual hurricane comes through rather than that pretend hurricane we had last week.
Yes, you might not have power. So think about that. Think about, well, how am I going to restore if my IT guys don't have power? They don't have internet. We have strategies where we have people in different states. All of the different, we have plans. We have people in data centers when there is a likelihood of doing a restore. But make sure you do test your backups. I literally do it. Well, I don't do it, but someone does it in ThreatLocker every day. I go down to the IT team at least once a week, at least maybe once every 2 weeks, and I'll randomly pick a ThreatLocker instance. And sometimes I'll just say, I want you to restore our entire data center to a different state, and the clock starts now.
Danny has, and this is not an exaggeration, told me to go into one of our data centers and plug out servers.
Yes, but that was testing a redundant service, but we want to make sure that these guys can apply. That was before they went live. They said they were.
It's not strictly speaking relevant to backup and disaster recovery, but backup and disaster recovery, if you've got a disaster recovery plan, think about where it is. If it's sitting on a server, it's sitting in a SharePoint, or sitting in somewhere where it could be encrypted and it could be destroyed, it's probably not a great disaster recovery plan. So make sure you have it somewhere where it can be accessed in the event of a disaster. And it's something that people often don't think about.
Including your admin passwords.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're in your password manager that happens to be stored on your server, it might cause you a problem too. So please test it like the server is down. Do not let anyone touch the live systems during the restore. Okay, so backup. That's really continued. Data loss prevention. Now, this is an interesting word because technically, all cybersecurity or most cybersecurity fits into data loss prevention. And this is some of the wording that's used in the standards. Like a data loss prevention should have a way of cataloging data. So knowing where your data is, cataloging it. And when we think about products and we think about how you do that, that's actually not easy because you've got a lot of data, you've got a lot of file shares. Where is it? Where's it changing? We can help in some areas where we have a centralized audit. But having a system to catalog data is very, very difficult. Protects data flow. What does this mean? Don't allow data flow to go where it doesn't need to.
From saving files on their desktop.
It's important. Uploading them to a browser if they don't need to upload them to a browser. Blocking certain websites. Protecting data integrity. Controlling who and what can change data. Controlling log and logging access to data. So look, this is very basic things. It's a lot of big words, but it means don't allow permissions to data if the user doesn't need permissions. So don't have a free for all. I actually heard, and I won't call out names, but I heard a CEO recently said, and they were of a software company, and they said, we are a completely open book policy to everyone. We still share data with all our staff. Everyone knows exactly what every department's doing. And that's a good culture. And we try and collaborate as a company. But at the end of the day, if our support guy doesn't need access to our financials, we don't give him access to our financials. Like, we share enough data that everyone understands where we're going as a company, but don't give access, don't have an open door policy to your data for all of your employees, because the amount of employees, the amount of times I've seen a person do something bad is unbelievable. So restrict it. Securely dispose access to data before decommissioning or moving equipment offsite. Now, if anyone's ever tried to actually securely dispose of a hard drive, there's only one way to do it. You can
big hammer.
Secure arrays. A hammer does not work. No, on solid state drive, it does not work. I mean, even personal hard drives. I remember I used to be drilling holes in them, and realistically, you could still get that data off those personal hard drives. Now, it's a little bit easier with solid state because you can burn them. So, but you're not supposed to do that. There are companies that will actually just securely dispose of your hard drives and any data you no longer need.
Doesn't it only apply to hard drives? Things like wireless access points, routers. People often don't think about them, and there's sensitive information stored on them as well.
Yes. So just pay a bit extra money to have that guy come away and mash it up into tiny metal pieces so it can never be used again, or at least go and wipe it from inside the system. Okay. Implement a system to monitor, control outbound connections to external systems that process and store sensitive data. So in other words, make sure that if you've got cloud storage, you have something to monitor and control connections to that. But also, if you don't have cloud storage, don't allow it to be accessed from your network. We can help with that with our network controller and our configuration manager. We can list only certain applications can talk to data. You can stop access to Dropbox if you don't use it. These are really easy ways to get data out of your company.
I remember one time, Danny, I set up ring fencing on WhatsApp. Somebody was using WhatsApp and they were like, we'll let them use WhatsApp, but we set it up to be ring fenced just in case. Discovered somebody trying to copy an entire finance folder to Dropbox.
Through WhatsApp?
Sorry, so WhatsApp, not Dropbox, WhatsApp.
Yes. WhatsApp is one of those apps that a lot of companies like to allow because customers, especially if you're dealing with retail, will communicate on WhatsApp, but it's a really easy way of getting data, end-to-end encryption out of your network. So monitor what's being accessed by that application if you are allowing WhatsApp, and also your browsers. So do control them, do block them where they're not needed. Of course, block access to social media where it's not needed. Privately owned devices, have a system that limits data from privately owned devices. My personal opinion, this is not a compliance opinion, is don't allow them. Just don't allow them. Like, we had this discussion last week.
Absolutely.
Rob first came in with his Mac and I said, that's not going on my network. And
made me so sad, but I did get over it.
Yeah, it got over it. So, but privately owned devices, when you're using them, look, there's no way of entirely securing them because you don't know that they haven't got keyloggers on them. They haven't got screenshot software on them. But when you do use privately owned devices, use something like a VDI or a terminal server or remote desktop servers. It can still read keyboard strokes. It can still read other strokes. I would put your security software on them so you at least know what is running on those devices before you allow connections.
Raoul has asked, will the slides be shared included along with the handbook? Yes.
So I believe so, but the slides are essentially a PowerPoint version of the handbook, but there's no reason we can't share them as slides as well.
Cool.
Okay, this is kind of stupid. I say it's stupid. It's not stupid. It's so obvious. But make sure you've got encryption to web servers. HTTPS, SSL. It shouldn't really be optional nowadays. But if you've got traffic going out to web servers on the internet, make sure that it is encrypted on the internet. Pretty much nearly every standard calls for that. The ones that don't, just assume you're doing it anyway because it's pretty common now. Google requires you to use HTTPS. Have a system, by the way, what does this mean? To encrypt sensitive and recovery data when stored on mobile devices, cloud devices in general. So in other words, mobile devices first, mobile phones, laptops included, USB drives, encrypt them. Use BitLocker in Windows. You don't have to go and buy some advanced encryption. We can help enforce BitLocker encryption on your devices, or just use external encryption too, but make sure they're encrypted. Data center.
In case somebody doesn't know, encrypting a mobile device is as simple as putting a PIN code on it. And you're amazed the number of people that actually don't know that. PIN code, Face ID, that kind of authentication will automatically encrypt the device. Certainly.
Well, but by nature, the iPhone is encrypted out of the box. But if it's encrypted and it's not got a pin on it, it's kind of encrypted. Nothing. So, but putting a pin on your phone is really important. A longer pin, preferably at least 6 digits. Not thinking having a lockout policy or at least a slowdown policy when someone enters the pin wrong. So implement a method to securely manage cryptographic keys throughout their lifecycle generation. Look, this just means when you're using encryption, have some kind of management system that rotates these keys. If they're shared, that you can change them. It doesn't have to be a piece of software that does it. It can literally be, I store my keys and just go and rotate them regularly that we don't have the same encryption key and decryption key for 10 years in the device. And the system doesn't need you to buy something. It just requires that you have a system. And if that system is, hey, I put a calendar appointment once a year to go and change any keys that I have to make sure that my keys are securely stored, then do that. And by the way, if you have BitLocker recovery keys, put them in a safe. Like print them out and put them on a safe, because the amount of times I see them on people's machines, it's unbelievable. Like, well, I couldn't get in because it was on my machine, or someone stole it because it was on my machine. So put them in a safe if you can. Print them out, put them in a safe. Hopefully you never need them anyway. More often than not, you lose them when they're on your machine, and then you can't recover, and you go, oh, my data's gone, and I'm going back to backup. Okay, so I'm going to really, really quickly skim over this. But if you do have group health plans, you've got to comply with standards to protect them. You've got to provide documents that show that they protect PHI. You've got to have a policy in place. If you've got a group health plan, most providers will help you with that data, but make sure you've got policies in place. Make sure if you do leak people's health data, report it. In most cases, you don't have to worry about this. It gets done through a third-party company, but you do have to ensure that your customers have something in place. Also, your business has something in place. Incident response. Now, this is tricky because this is what you do not want. And ThreatLocker has a whole department or whole group of people that deals with incident response. So quite often there's two types of customers that come to ThreatLocker. There's customers that come to ThreatLocker because they want to proactively lock down their systems, ensure they're not going to get an incident. The other type of customer is the ones that just got hit by ransomware and they need to get control of this shit. And they've put an EDR out there and they're like basically playing whack-a-mole. Like I get something and then it changes and I hit it again and the EDR blocks it and I keep doing this. And they come into ThreatLocker and say, hey, roll out an agent. Let's put it in secured mode. Let's not learn. Let's allow what we need and block everything else. And then we can return with that, but reply with that. But most companies that come to us in that scenario don't have a plan. Actually, I would say all companies nearly don't have a plan, because if most companies have got to the state they have a plan, they already have something like ThreatLocker, they have allow listing, they have blocking in place. But make sure you have a plan in place. What happens if there is someone found on your system that you've got that certain thresholds are exceeded? So for example, if you say invalid logins exceed this, that we have a reply, someone can actually respond to that. You've got some kind of security operations center that replies to alerts. Now with ThreatLocker, we can help you with that. With ThreatLocker Ops, we can give you standard policies that say if this happens, respond, send that to your team so they can respond. But more importantly, if you have a plan for a major, hey, what happens if someone really gets into our system? How are we going to recover from ransomware? Who are we going to call? Who is our lawyer? Who's our legal team? Do we have a PR team? Put some kind of plan in place. Most often than not, this should not be your IT department that's doing this, but they should be involved in the technical part of that plan. But there should be a business plan that says, this is how we're going to deal with the press if this happens. Now, also have a plan to not let it happen, which is more important.
But also, don't store that plan anywhere that it can get encrypted.
Okay, logging and monitoring. You've got to have logs of all events. This starts with Windows logs, but any system you use creates logs. Try and store those logs in a central place. Most standards require some kind of centralized logging. Some of them say you've got to have certain logging in Office, you've got to have certain logging in Windows. A lot of them just are very, very generic, but user activity should be logged. Every system you have should have a log. It should be tracked. If you can put it in a central place, do that. So if you can use a SIM, if you can use some kind of central log storage, do that. If you're using ThreatLocker, we log everything from your agents. And even with ThreatLocker Ops now, we can take your Windows event logs and bring them in when certain alerts are triggered. But make sure they're logged and make sure that they're at least tracked if they're being cleared and you have a time synchronization on them. So you don't think this log happened 2 days ago because the clock's wrong.
You wouldn't believe the amount of times when people go looking for logs. I mean, I've been even something as simple as, you know, person A was let go yesterday. Did they access data before they left? I've literally in a prior life, I've been asked that question from somebody. And if you don't have advanced auditing and logging windows turned on, you're basically out of luck. So having that kind of logs in place with either a tool like ThreatLocker or through advanced auditing and logging in Windows is really important.
Yes. Now, network security, a firewall that uses least privilege. All firewalls, when you turn them on, or all firewalls should have a rule at the end that says deny all traffic. That should be the last rule. And then you have rules above that to allow the traffic you need. Pretty much every standard requires this. And where they don't, it's because everyone already has one, or they feel like it's so basic, I don't need to list it. But the Windows firewall does this by itself. I don't particularly like it because it's completely decentralized and it means you have no control over, and you don't know what people are doing. So with that client, they had RDP open, they didn't even know on one of their IT guys' machines. And we found it because they had unauthorized logins on their event log. Well, they got an alert from their EDR actually. And then when we went to diagnose why we couldn't find this rootkit, it wasn't a rootkit. It was an alert from RDP, unauthorized logins from Russia. You should have a centralized firewall.
I had a customer who did have a centralized firewall, Danny. They deployed about 70 machines in their private cloud, and we used network access control. And when we turned it on, left it logging for about a week or so, I said to the guy, look, how many machines do you think have had incoming RDP connections over the last week? He thought there would be 2. Turns out there was 17. He'd misconfigured the perimeter firewall. 17 with incoming RDP connections.
Yeah, so that was a central firewall. Yeah, so there's two problems. One is the perimeter firewall, but also even the endpoint firewalls. When you've got 500 endpoints out in the wild, you don't know if people have opened up RDP on their home firewalls. You don't know what people are doing in their offices, their home offices, when they're going out to Starbucks. Did they turn off their Windows firewall? Did they add exceptions? Having a centralized endpoint firewall is just as important as a perimeter firewall.
Absolutely.
Actually, I think it's more important because more and more, especially
I had no idea. He didn't have that visibility because he was depending on Windows Defender or Defender firewall.
Yes. And when you're using the Defender firewall, you don't have that visibility. I think having first of all, more important than your perimeter firewall in most businesses is actually your endpoint firewall, because more and more businesses have laptops, people moving remote. They're 80% of the time, people are, or 80% of users at some point are not behind the perimeter firewall. So having a perimeter firewall is really about protecting service in data centers more than it is about protecting endpoints. Make sure you've got good endpoint firewalls and even endpoint firewalls on your servers, and make sure you can configure that. If you're using network control, we show you, and you should be logging all network activity. We show you all inbound and outbound network traffic from all of your endpoints in one go. Make sure you configure which apps can access the internet. That is really, really important. And outside of all of these standards saying that, just by blocking internet access, SolarWinds Orion, Exchange vulnerability, both of those, well, many, many more, but those are two big ones I can think about, would have been foiled just by blocking internet access. So only allow programs that need to go out to the internet to go out to the internet, because it will really harden your environment. And you do not want your users browsing the web on the servers, or your admins even.
Absolutely not. Servers don't need to connect. If the server doesn't need to connect to the internet, just don't let it connect to the internet. You're going to stop data exfiltration, command and control, all manner of things.
I'll say this very quickly. You don't need to, in any standard, have some massive complex DNS filtering. You just need to have a filter that stops malicious or certain sites. Google has a free one. I'm not saying I like these, and there's lots of problems with using Google. Ultra DNS have one where you can block known malicious sites as well, and you can use those free of charge in most cases. So network security is continued. Email, only use supported email clients. I mean, look, we shouldn't be using POP anymore, but if you're using Office 365, use Outlook or use Outlook Web. Use something that don't use third-party email clients, because you don't know whether they're secure or not. DMARC, SPF is not listed in here, but just set them up. It makes a big difference. Now, the problem is with DMARC is it's not going to help when someone registers your domain with a very, very similar domain, but it will make it harder for someone to spoof your address. And frankly, it makes your email deliver better as well.
Like threatlocker.com.
Threat
Um,
threatoinker.com.
Yeah. Rel Vasquez has asked now. Sorry, This is a safe nerd question, Danny. I started looking into fireproof safes and found out most fireproof safes will only protect contents from fire for less than 4 hours. Plus, if longer than 4 hours is possible, the contents of safes will be disintegrated. Anyone else have insight on this? So that's it. Here we go. I'm going to hand you over to our safe nerd.
No, I'm not that much of a safe nerd. However, and that's correct. Most fireproof safes rate protection of paper for 4 hours, by the way, and protection of normally tapes. If anyone's using tape backups, that is a much smaller number because that
tape backup.
The melting point of tape is bad. But even certain hard drives, so that it is protection of paper for 4 hours. However, if your offsite backup should be offsite, so it shouldn't be in the same building as your live system. And 4 hours is a long time for a building to burn, unless you're in an area where you've got wildfires or something like that, where the whole area is taken over. But you're thinking about an isolated fire, 4 hours is a long time. I'm more concerned about someone breaking into it and getting my DR plan with passwords and other information into it from it. Okay, use email anti-malware and block certain file types at the gateway. Mostly Office does that now. Office 365 does that. There are third parties that will give you better, but if you're looking for compliance, using what's built into Office 365 should meet your requirements. Implement a system to microsegment the network virtually or via VLAN. So for those who don't know, VLAN essentially allows you to have one switch, multiple ports, and certain virtual networks on there. So you can have a VLAN tag and you can say, this is on this virtual network. So the phone system's on the phone network, the PC system's on the PC network, and they can't see each other. That's a really good idea. It's sometimes difficult because what happens is you have to decide, well, my phone system needs to be able to see my server because it does this. And on the same server, especially in a small business, my PCs now to be able to see it. So now suddenly you end up merging things together or having crossovers.
It's really even more complicated when your computer connects to the network via your phone, which is the case a lot of the time. Try microsegment that.
I think you can VLAN that.
Maybe.
I think you can because your tag is applied at the network adapter.
I'm tagging, said Danny. Okay, I take it back.
Yeah. But however,
okay. So apparently Mike says you can be like that. Yeah. Okay.
So however, so you should have a system to microsegment your network. Now I want to talk about something different than that because it's not that easy. Because here's the problem. You're in your network, you're the IT guy, you're sitting down and you're saying, well, I am connected to my network. I can see my server, it's Active Directory. I can see my Exchange server if anyone runs Exchange still. I can see all of the parts of my system I need to see. And then your user comes in and says, yeah, I can do the same. And then you log onto your server via RDP. And then your user says, sweet, I can log onto the server via RDP. Only they don't have a password to, which is good, but they have the same access to the same network as you do. So I think something's cooler than VLAN, which is something we call dynamic ACLs. So you should have a firewall rather than using VLANs, or you can use VLANs as well. Have a firewall, an endpoint firewall on your servers, on your endpoints, and only open ports where those ports need to be opened. So for example, in ThreatLocker, we could say with a dynamic ACL, I'm going to open port 3389, but only from the IT manager's laptop. So when the IT manager comes in the day, gets his DHCP address, it doesn't open 3389 to the whole LAN. It only opens it to him. So if someone gets on another user's computer and does a port scan, they can't see port 3389 open. That gives you far more micro control than simple VLANs, which is which LAN are you on and which devices can you see. In this case, we can say which ports you can see based on the user's permission. So if you are using ThreatLocker's network control, I think that's much easier than VLANs. And it means if someone else comes into your network and they're on the network, they can't see your device. But also, it means if you have a user that doesn't need RDP access, who doesn't need SMB access, you can configure it based on the device it's coming from rather than just the IP address on the same LAN. Basic network controls, 802.11, having something to authorize people on your Wi-Fi properly is really important. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go really quick as fast as I can. Physical security controls. It's really, really important. You can have the best security in the world. When I was 18 years old, I walked into a bank and said I was from the IT. I call it an MSP. It was in the 90s. They weren't really called MSPs then. I was from the IT company. I needed to do work on the server. They let me in. and they told me their password, which was something like "let me in 123," by the way. So physical security is pointless. Virtual security is pointless if you don't have physical security. But making sure you've got locks on your server room's doors, cameras, environmental controls, these are all required. Temperature control, humidity control, because security isn't just about can someone steal my data, but is your data still available? Physical access logs of who's been in and access your data center. If you're using data centers, they should all be included in any kind of tier 3 or tier 4 data center. Monitors employees, escorted access. It causes a problem. Actually, we have a building here, and we have a building security guy, and he decided to come on our floor the other day. And our floor in ThreatLocker, if you've been to our office, we've got locked office. Like once you get off the elevator, we've got a reception area, and then we've got controlled areas with badge scanners. Everyone has an ID around their neck, like looks like this. And we actually color code it, so every 3 months it changes. So if you have to get a new ID every 3 months. This guy got off the elevator, his security had a security badge on. I didn't recognize him. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm the building security. I'm just walking the floor." I was like, "No, you're not," because you don't need to have access. He said, "Well, I'm building security. I need to walk the floor." I said, "It's not happening. I don't care if you're building security." I didn't know who he was. I said, "You're not a ThreatLocker employee. You don't need to have access to any area up here." So having badged areas and having people aware of that is really, really important. So it's everyone's responsibility to make sure if someone is on the floor who's not escorted, they ask them who they are and what they're doing here. And I kind of get mad, and everyone in ThreatLocker knows if you see someone without a ThreatLocker ID or without an escort, then, and even with an escort, they have a visit. Then ask them. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get in trouble for asking someone, and ask them, "I'm going to escort you out the building until I find out who you are." But
Georgie has asked, what do you think about having a jump server to accessing our servers on the network?
A jump server, as in I have a server and then that goes from one server to the other.
Mm-hmm. I know of a few people who do this.
Yeah, so I think it's not bad. I mean, look, anything that makes it harder is a good idea, but the jump server needs to be secured as if it was a server on your network. You can't just say, "Well, I'm going to leave an RDP server here, which can now access another RDP server there," because these guys aren't stupid. They'll get on and put recording software on that server, and they'll record everything you're doing. Single point of failure as well. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. It's an extra hop, which is good, but you've got to secure it as if you were securing your own server. So if you have a jump server, make sure you've got network control, make sure you've got dynamic ACLs, make sure you've got dual factor authentication, make sure everything is on that as if it was your server, because otherwise people, if they can get onto that and then they can hop to your server, it's kind of pointless.
Raoul has suggested, anyone wondering about a compliance framework /guide, head over to auditscripts.com. They have really good assessment tools.
Hopefully that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I haven't actually checked it out. Maybe I should.
Yeah, just to caveat that, we haven't given any
trusting you.
Yeah, we haven't given any independent advice on that, but it may be worth checking out. But check out with caution. Firmware on your Wi-Fi boxes, firmware on your firewalls, firmware on your air conditioning control. Update them. It's important. They're still systems on your network, and preferably control them so they're not on your network.
I ran a network scan on my network at home some time ago, Danny. I had 57 devices on my network, everything from printers to scanners to heating, Nest, Ring, cameras, everything, including my oven. And one thing I can say with absolute certainty is I've never patched my oven. So,
have you ever used your oven, Rob?
Well, that is another good point. I have once or twice, maybe. Once or twice. Can confirm, by the way, auditscripts.com does certainly appear to be compliance related, unless they've got some inappropriate content hidden around in the background, but it definitely looks like a compliance website. All right. So, Raoul, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go on to an important one, remote access controls. All remote access should be monitored. And when I say monitored, it should be monitored with standards. When they're normally logging in, you should get alerts on it. If someone puts the wrong password in, there should be emails. If they put it in multiple times, it should go emails and alerts to multiple people. Monitoring remote access is really important. Logging it is equally important, but looking at those logs is more important, because if you don't log it and don't look at them, it's pointless. Automatic lockout. When certain conditions are met, those conditions could be too many passwords entered wrong, try to get in from a bad location. I mean, I feel like remote access control of execution of privileged commands, such as an RDP session. So first of all, if someone gets into an RDP set, you shouldn't publish an RDP server on the web. If you do need to publish remote desktops, do it through some kind of RDP gateway with dual factor, and preferably use dynamic ACL so that RDP gateway isn't even visible to the world. But you should control execution of privileged commands on there, so they can't open PowerShell, they can't elevate, they can't do things like that. Of course, we can help you with a lot of this. Use automatic termination of user sessions. I know we are really running out of time, so I'm going to quickly go through the last one. Secure coding practice. Every supply chain attack ever nearly involves someone didn't do something simple. Either, well, not just supply chain, but when we think about the Kaseya incident in 2021, that was a SQL injection attack. Make sure your code is reviewed for secure code. You can run automatic scans on it, but if we think about SolarWinds Orion, that's someone getting into their Git and modifying code. Make sure you've got code reviews. Make sure you do penetration testing. I can't stress these things enough. It scares me more than anything else. We do lots and lots of this, but make sure if you are a development house that you follow these procedures. And I would say make sure that every company you're buying code from that runs on your system does it. It's not always practical, but if they can't give you a SOC report showing you this, at least ring fence the application so they can't do too much damage to your computers. I'm going to finish off on this because I think we've got like 1 minute left. There's a bunch of other things in the compliance handbook. Guys, if you haven't already done a demo of ThreatLocker, if you go to threatlocker.com, I don't think we posted a link in here. Go to threatlocker.com, book a demo. We will show you how ThreatLocker can help you with all of these controls. If you are a partner and you want to check out some of our new features like our network control, our ThreatLocker Ops, which is going live very, very soon, or even configuration manager, you can book a second demo or you can from our website as well. To get a $200 off Zero Trust World, the coupon code is Web Compliance 2. But what's cool about it is the $295 will get refunded if you pass the Cyber Hero test well at Zero Trust World. Now, just in case you think you can come in without doing ThreatLocker University and pass the test, you're wrong. I promise you're wrong. So please don't.
You have zero chance of passing it if you don't study.
Yes, you can go through ThreatLocker University and you can do it when you get on site. If you do pass and you become a certified cyber hero, you get a refund of your ticket as well. We apologize for all the people last year that did not get their bosses refunds and got in trouble.
We don't really. You should have studied harder, people.
Join us in Orlando, Florida, and you get to go into labs to learn how to hack with Rubber Ducky, Pineapples, Metasploit. We got Capture the Flag stuff, which really is a hands-on lab. But we also do training labs on how to secure Office 365, how to secure Windows Server, what you should be doing to make your environment more appropriate. It's a great 3 days in Orlando, Florida. It's in February, so it is the best time of year to visit Orlando, although it was pretty nice last night as well, at a nice 75, 80 degrees. So that was a nice surprise.
On the subject of weather, can I just say all those people who reached out to me who were concerned about my welfare after last week's hurricanes, they were basically a nothing burger people. Nothing happened. It rained a bit, bit windy. It's basically like an average Wednesday back home. So it's fine. Nobody needs to panic, me included.
Rob, thank you. I promise the next webinar is going to be more hands-on, but now we've got through the compliance. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.